Hello again everyone, and welcome to another episode of Louis Garage. So we are still working on the Lotus Exige. It is taking a little bit longer than expected because we've had a few little snags, like the drive shafts, the CV joints and all those sort of things, you know, all those non-important things. So in the meantime, what I've done is, in the order that I made for the outer CV joint that you can see over there, I actually ordered the Baffled Sump from EliseParts as well. And the reason behind this is it's actually quite a critical problem with this car. When you're going around a high G corner, quite often this car will get oil starvation in the engine. It's a bit of a design flaw in the way that the normal sump works. And a lot of people have blown up their engines and have had to rebuild the engines or replace the engines because of this issue. I don't think this car has had any of those problems so far. But I do plan on driving it on the track, which is why we're doing a lot of these upgrades and a lot of these fixes. So I thought it's probably a good time to buy the Baffled Sump from EliseParts. So as you can see, this is the Aftermarket Sump. It's pretty basic. It's literally just there to hold your oil at the bottom of your engine and to allow the oil pickup to suck the oil up and distribute it around the engine, so make sure that your engine is lubricated at all times. As you can see, the EliseParts one is really nice. It's made out of aluminium. It's been powder coated, so it looks really nice. It looks like a factory sump, which is actually what I wanted. I didn't really want something that was super bling, so this is really nice. And it also stops corrosion on the aluminium as well. And as you can see, there's a bunch of these little gates that open. Apparently they open at 60 degrees, which they said is the optimum angle according to the description. You know, whatever, that's pretty cool. As long as it works, I don't really mind. And I like the fact that it's not super complicated. It's pretty simple. You can see exactly what's going on in here as well, and it seems like it's very high quality. If you look at all the welds, it looks really nice, really strong. It's quite thick as well. You can see that's not going anywhere anytime soon. So definitely a good quality part. They also include a magnetic sump plug, which is really important as well, to make sure that any sort of metal shavings or anything that could damage your engine gets sucked up on the magnet rather than going through your engine. There's also a fitting here for oil temperature, I believe, or oil pressure. I can't remember which one, sorry. But yeah, that's something that we'll not be using, but something that you could use in the future if you wanted some more information about what your oil was doing. They also include all the nuts and bolts, which is great, and some instructions. They also include the gasket maker, or the silicone that goes around the sump, but unfortunately, because we're in New Zealand, they couldn't ship that to us, so we had to buy that separately in New Zealand. But if you're anywhere apart from New Zealand, you can probably get that shipped together as a kit as well. So what we'll do is we'll take the original sump off and clean it up and make sure that the surface is really nice and ready for a new sump. Yeah, and then we should be able to install the new sump here, which would be really nice. Give us a little bit of insurance from the engine blowing up on track. So step number one is actually just going to be checking your existing oil level, and that's going to be clear later on why that might be important, because the new Baffled Sump apparently has an extra litre of capacity. So we do need to just make sure we know roughly how much oil we already have in the engine stock. So here's the dipstick. So sorry, this is the right hand side of the engine, and there's the oil dipstick. So we're just going to pull that out and check the oil level, and then that way we know roughly how much oil we have currently. Alright everyone, so you can see I've pulled out the dipstick and we are almost at the full mark on my dipstick. So we're just going to take a photo of that and record how much oil we have currently in the engine. Alright, so the next step is to get under the car. If you haven't done so, remove the under tray, which I've already done because I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff on the car at the moment, and jack up the car like I've done and put it on axle stands or jack stands. And what you want to do is get a 14mm socket. There we go. And that fits over the 14mm sump plug. And then we're just going to loosen that sump plug and let the oil drain. Make sure you have a drain pan ready. Clean up your drain pan really well if you want to reuse the oil. But I recommend that you just use new oil anyway. It's a good chance to do an oil change. This is going to be the first oil change that I'm doing on this car. The previous owner said that they did an oil change before they sold it to me, but honestly I'm not 100% sure that they did, so might as well put in new oil. I've got some full synthetic oil going in, so that should be nice for the engine. Yeah, we'll just get rid of the old oil and we should be good to go. Just removing the sump plug now. One trick is to push on the sump plug as you're unscrewing it, and that way you don't drop it into the oil pan. There you go. It's actually looking pretty dirty, so kind of glad that I'm changing the oil. Yeah, I'm going to get an oil sample for this as well and get it analysed. It's actually worth doing for these sort of cars, so I'll probably make a whole new video for that as well. But yeah, just drain the oil. You should be getting about 4 to 4.4 litres out, and then we'll know. Luckily my oil pan also has some gauges for the volume of oil that's coming out, so I should be able to figure out from the side there how many litres we're getting. Cool. And for me folks, I'm going to be changing my oil filter at the same time as well, because I do not know how old that one is and it's not really a good brand. So I'm going to be changing it to one that I got from the UK. So I've got a oil filter spanner set, or cup set. So I recommend you get one of these if you're working on lots of cars, and it fits perfectly in there, and I just need to loosen it up. So it's pretty straightforward using this ratchet. Obviously you can use other tools if you have, but it's nice having the right tool. So I'm just going to loosen that up, and we'll spin the oil filter off as well. You know, every time you think, I'm just going to drain the oil and I'm going to keep it as clean as humanly possible this time, and it never happens. So probably a good idea to put some cardboard down, but hey, that's what degrease is for, right? So I'm going to clean that up before I do anything else. Hey guys, so I've taken the filter off, and guess what I found? And you would not believe this, but I actually found an extra seal that was lodged inside the oil filter housing after I pulled off the oil filter. And no, this is not the seal for the oil filter, because, well, for the current oil filter, because the oil filter already has a seal. This is from probably a previous oil change, and they just haven't taken the oil filter seal out, which is extremely dangerous because you could actually double seal it and all the oil would just go between the two seals. But I was actually lucky and fortunate enough that nothing catastrophic happened. I did notice there was a little bit of an oil leak coming from the oil filter, so I tightened up the oil filter a little bit. But now I'm really glad that I've removed the whole thing, and I'm just going to replace the oil filter as well, because that could have been a major issue. So if you're doing an oil change, please do not do this. Please make sure that you have taken the seal off the old oil filter. Sometimes it gets stuck on the housing here. But just make sure that you do that, because otherwise it could end up in a pretty catastrophic situation. So what are we going to do now? We are going to be removing the bolts from the sump here. I believe there's 16 bolts to remove. They're just size 10 hex bolts, so it should be pretty straightforward. And then we should be able to drop the entire sump down and then clean the surface, getting ready for the new sump. Alright, so just a couple more tips here. We just need to remove this dust cover that is covering the gearbox here, and that's just a pop out. It's just a plastic cover, so that's pretty easy to remove, and that will expose 2 more bolts. Also, I believe it's a good idea to loosen the bolts in the same pattern that you would sort of tighten it. So try and do opposite corners, and don't loosen it all the way, just loosen a little bit at a time, and just try and do all of the bolts at the same time, you know, roughly the same sort of looseness, because otherwise you could actually warp, or you could actually damage your sump if you wanted to use this again. We're probably not going to use this again, but you know, it's a good idea just to keep it in good condition anyway. Cool, so we'll just remove all the bolts and hopefully the sump will just drop. Alright, so what have we done to get the sump loose? We had to use a couple of screwdrivers and a knife just to try and cut the sealant. and also, you know, try and loosen it up as much as possible. So we've just been working on this corner, which is right at the back of the engine. And this one, I think this one's good because it gives you a bit of leverage. There's a little bit of extra metal there, but just be very careful because it is an aluminium block. So we, you know, try not to use too much force, and we try not to score the block or damage the block in any way. Just make sure that you look after your sealing surfaces on the inside there. But I think we should have enough to get it off now. You can see that gap developing and getting nice and big now. So hopefully we can actually just get that screwdriver in there. Good thing is we're not actually reusing the sump, so we don't really care too much about the sump, but we are trying to save it as much as we can. Sweet, there we go. So you can see it coming. Oh,
You need to actually pull it towards you as well a bit. Ready to catch?
there we go. It's the sump off. So now we just need to clean up all these surfaces, make sure that there's no RTV. Looks like it's pretty clean already. It's just taken all the RTV with the sump, which is nice. And then we'll just clean up the surface, make sure there's no oil on it. Maybe get rid of some of these studs, because we've got bolts instead of studs. I don't know if we can get rid of these actually. But yeah, we'll just...
Put the nuts on.
Yeah.
As long as the hole's in the right place, just put the nuts on.
Yeah, we might just put the nuts on, because otherwise it's a bit of a pain. So, yeah, hopefully get the new sump on soon. On a long right-hander, yes, exactly. So what we think happens is that on a long right-hander, all the oil gets pushed to the other side of the sump, and then there's no more oil in the oil pickup area. So what the baffles do is they stop the oil from sloshing around and, you know, going over to the other side of the sump. And also there's more oil capacity. So the aftermarket EliseParts oil sump actually has another litre of capacity. So there's more oil to go around anyway, which is good for the engine. So as you can see, there's probably, yeah, you can see that there's a lot of sealant just over there, for example. So I'm just going to have to clean up the surface quite a bit. Make sure it's as clean as humanly possible before you try and put the new sump in. I'm also going to have to just test fit it, because apparently sometimes you do have to modify the windage tray here a little bit, and I think we will have to remove these studs and replace with the bolts that came with the kit. So let's do all of that, and then hopefully it should be pretty easy to install the aftermarket sump. Alright, and here is the view of my old sump, the sump that just came out of the car, and as you can see, it's just a factory standard sump. Some people actually exchanged the 2ZZ sump with the 1ZZ, because the 1ZZ has like a little chamber for the oil pickup. But I think the chamber is not necessarily a good mod for the Exige, because it kind of stops the oil from coming back down and kind of slows down the rate of oil. So I don't think it's a good idea necessarily to put that in, but I'm not 100% sure. I've just decided to go with the aftermarket one just because I know that it works. So you can see that it's quite an interesting pattern here. So there's actually not much of a chamber for the oil to sit in over here. But yeah, when you're going through high G corners, all the oil will just slowly creep over to here and go all the way to here, and therefore there won't be any in the oil pickup area. The other thing I noticed as well is that they use a lot of sealant from factory. I don't think we're going to be using this much sealant. So that's probably going to make things a little bit, you know, tidier. And there's also quite a bit of oil remaining even when you drain the oil. So that's not a good sign either. You know, the sump probably could have been designed a little bit better. Good thing is though, it doesn't look like there's any sort of metal in there at all in the oil. So that's quite nice. It looks like the oil is fairly clean. There's a few bits of sealant that's not metal, that's just sealant, because we've just obviously taken the sump off. Otherwise it looks really new, so it actually looks pretty good. I don't know if anyone wants the sump. I don't think we're going to reuse it, but yeah, I'll probably just keep it just as a spare part. And I'm not sure if this sump plug is magnetic as well. I might test it out later to see, but yeah, that's the old sump if you're interested. Alright, so another thing in the instructions is that they said that we may need to fiddle with the windage tray. And so what I've done is I've taken the windage tray off, It's pretty easy. It's just 4 bolts, 4 10mm bolts, and you do have to remove the oil pickup as well, which is 3 10mm bolts. So it's actually pretty easy to remove. And as you can see, the problem is right here, I believe. So this is roughly where the windage tray would be going if it was in the car, and it just hits that little corner there. And as you can see in the photo, that's the same corner that they want us to cut some material off. So it should be pretty straightforward. Let me just line it up properly for you so you can see over here. So it's just that little corner there, same corner as that one. So we're going to try and cut some material off that, and hopefully that will resolve the issue. Okay, so the next step is to get these studs out, because the new oil pan is a little bit too thick for the original studs, and we're going to replace them with the bolts that came supplied with the pan. So what I've got is just a big pair of pliers, and I've already removed one down there. Just need to remove 3 more. So just get a pair of pliers and squeeze really hard. Try not to mar the surface of the block, because obviously that's where it's going to be sealing, so try not to scratch that or get any of that damaged. So keep your pliers off the block a little bit, and then just turn, and it should come free. Might need both hands for this, but yeah, just remove all those studs. We don't need those anymore. So yeah, I'll show you on this one, which is the very last stud that I have to do. So you just want to clamp it in with your pliers or with your vice grips, and then as you turn, the stud will come out. Unfortunately, it is a very slow process. So I thought this was going to be really fast, but in fact it is very, very slow. But you'll get there eventually, and then after that we should be able to put in the new sump. Alright, so now the windage tray and the oil pickup are ready to go back into the bottom of the engine. So as you can see at the very edge here, we have done a little bit of a modification. George basically just attacked it with a hacksaw and just took some material off, and then we've just used a file and used some sandpaper to clean it up as best as we can. Doesn't have to be super pretty, but as long as it avoids touching the pan, and it doesn't have any metal that's coming off of it, that should be fine. So I'm going to reinstall that and the oil pickup, and then we should be ready to install the new pan. Alright, so there it is, guys. We've got all our 4 studs out. As you can see, those are all now out, and I've got the windage tray back in with our slight modification on that corner there, and also the oil pickup. I've talked up all these bolts to 10 Newton meters because I feel like that's, you know, roughly what I would want for these size bolts and for the aluminium block. So you know, I don't think there's any instructions on how much torque there is, but it feels about right to me, so I just took them up to 10 Newton meters. Now I'm just going to give the surface a final clean with some degreaser, maybe sand a few bits down that I've scratched, and then we should be able to put on the sealant and put the pan on. Cool, so what I've done is I've used some of the Hyalomar blue sealant that is recommended by EliseParts. I've just squeezed a bunch of sealant onto the new oil pan, and it's looking really good. You don't need a really big bead of sealant, you just need to make sure that you don't have any gaps in there. And I've done a similar thing on the bottom of the engine as well, because the instructions recommend that you do have both surfaces coated as well. So what I'm doing now is I'm just waiting for roughly 10 minutes for everything to kind of become tacky and for the solvent to evaporate, and then I should be able to get everything bolted up and reinstalled. Yep, and here you can see I've done a very similar thing to the bottom of the block there, just to make sure that I've got enough sealant and that both sides are coated. Alright everyone, so I've just hand tightened all of the bolts around there. There are a lot of bolts to get through, so this is going to take a little bit of time, but that's all good. So I had 16 bolts to do, but EliseParts actually gave me 17 bolts. Good on them for giving me a spare just in case anything went wrong, but I did not need the spare one. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my torque wrench, and I'm going to slowly start torquing up to the specified torque, which EliseParts says is 15 Newton meters. So what I'll do first, they don't really say this, but what I'll do first is I'll torque it down to 5 Newton meters, So what I'll do is I'll start torquing from the inside out, so in a crisscross pattern. So I'll do the one here, and then out, and then out, and then out, and then out like that. And I'll do 5 Newton meters first, and then 10 Newton meters, and then it'll be back to 15 Newton meters, which is the specified final torque rating. Luckily, I do have my little torque wrench. You can see here, this is the little one. It's actually for my bicycle, but it really does come in handy for these car things as well. And I'm going to use that to specify the torque settings. Alright, so I've just done my last bolt torque, and now I'm just trying to fit the oil return plug, and they did say in the instructions to put a little bit of sealant on that as well, so I've just done that, and I've got my plug here. There we go, so we just got to thread that through with the sealant. And I'm guessing there's probably a torque setting for that. And this sump plug will be torqued to 15 Newton meters. There is a little bit of discrepancy because on the sticker it says 25, but in the instructions it says 15. So I might just do it to 15, and hopefully there's no leaks. And then if it still leaks, then I might try and do 25. But yeah, that should be fine. Alright everyone, so I'm almost ready to put the oil back into the engine, which is great because that's the end of the Baffled Sump job. So the one thing I had to do just before I finish this off, I had to modify the Flywheel inspection area protector. And originally this just goes on and it fits really well, but because now we have a slightly bigger pan and the bolts actually rub up against here, and so they stop you from putting this protector back in and putting the tab back in properly. So just make sure that you just test all of these things first and make sure that you can do that. I just made some really rough cuts here with a hacksaw, so it doesn't really look that pretty, but that's okay because it's just going to the underside of the car. We're probably never going to see this again as long as it fits and it holds properly. Alright, so now that we've got the sump back in and it's all torqued up, it's been a couple of days since I installed it, and I've let the sealant set properly. Now it's time to pour in the new engine oil. There's probably going to be about 5.5 litres worth, because the Baffled Sump does allow for an extra litre of engine oil. Luckily I've got some engine oil just kind of sitting around. I was going to use this for the AMG, but the AMG doesn't actually need an oil change right now, and it's not even here at the moment. It's not at home at the moment, it's in storage. So I'm just going to use this engine oil, which it's actually quite a good one, the Shell Helix full synthetic, and we're going to put that into the Lotus for now and see how we go. Oil going in, so I'm going to put about 4.5 litres and then check the dipstick and see where it is. Alright guys, so we're just going to start the car for about 10 seconds, let the oil circulate a little bit, and then we'll turn it off and check the oil level again. Top up the fluid, and then do one final check. And we'll let it run for about 10 minutes just to let it warm up, make sure that there's no leaks. So far so good, there's no leaks at the moment, so we'll give it a bit of a start. Alright, so as far as I can tell, we're about halfway between the lower mark and the upper mark. So I'm just going to add a little bit more oil in and get it all the way up to the upper mark. Alright everyone, and there you have it. I have decided that I'm just going to keep the engine oil just below the maximum mark, which should be fine considering I've got an extra litre of capacity and the Baffled Sump. So I don't think there'll be any problems there. I think some people run it all the way up to full, some people run it slightly over full. That's really just kind of up to you. I'm not going to be pushing this car too hard, at least for now. So I'll just go with that and top up the oil if necessary. So there you go, that's the end of the video. So hopefully you found that enjoyable and you found that a little bit educational about how to install a Baffled Sump on the Lotus Exige S. Obviously the same kind of principle applies for a lot of other cars as well, so hopefully you found that kind of useful. Alright, well, see you next episode, and thanks for watching. Hopefully there'll be a lot more content coming for the Lotus Exige S.